And then 30-second pitches, which will open up to all of you if you want to pitch or talk about anything. You're more than welcome. The only rule is 30 seconds. And then lastly, networking and snacks. So Evan, please take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, NewLab, for hosting us. I'm very excited to be here with these incredible people, two of which I've worked with, which we'll talk a little bit about. But yeah, packaging and logistics of the future, obviously a focus on sustainability. Even though I enjoyed the warm weather today, it's also very creepy. So I think we need to do something about it. This topic is near and dear to my heart. I started my career as a design manufacturing engineer making food storage containers for OXO, and then more recently worked at Walmart on circular economy initiatives, and then most recently at the Rounds, heading up strategic initiatives. So that's a bit about me. I'd like to introduce our panel and then have them speak a little bit more about their businesses, and then we'll dive into a lively discussion and then followed up by Q&A. So immediately to my left is Caroline, who I had a pleasure of meeting while working at the Rounds. Caroline puts her passions and creativity into building businesses such as Redish and is excited to be able to tell its huge environmental impact story. A successful entrepreneur, Caroline has launched businesses with parent companies such as CNBC and AT&T, as well as independent entities like the publishing technology company SharedBook. She's armed with a BA from Vassar and an MBA from NYU. She's a lifelong learner, which I can attest to, and newly focused on sustainability and the huge impact that Redish can and is having as it supports a shift from a linear to a circular economy. So please welcome Caroline. Immediately to her left is Larasati. She's the owner and founder of Maison Jar, a refillery and low-waste grocery store. I love the term low waste, by the way. We'll dig into that. That opened in April 2022 in Brooklyn. Prior, Larasati spent 8 years with the food ingredient manufacturer NatureX, a worldwide leader in plant-based ingredients, where she worked closely with consumer packaged groups to craft natural solutions for food and supplement brands. A native of France, Larasati has lived in New York for the last 11 years, which I think gives you your New York City resident card. You've made the hurdle. And we met in Marketplace of the Future during Climate Week, but a big fan of your business and happy to have you here. Please welcome Larasati. And last but not least, at the end, we have Lauren Sweeney, who is the CEO and co-founder of Deliver Zero. Deliver Zero is on a mission to normalize reuse. They're a fast-growing climate tech company with product market fit and highly visible partnerships with market leaders in restaurant technology and food service. Lauren and I got to know each other while I was at Walmart, working on some pilots there. So thank you for joining, and please welcome Lauren. So while I'm very familiar with all of your businesses, not everyone in the room is. So I thought we would just start and have each of you tell us a little bit about your businesses and what you're working on.
What order?
We'll start with you.
Okay. Hi, thank you all for having me. I joked earlier that we're standing in the way of all those food sources. We'll try to be succinct and let you taste pretty quickly. I started Redish 4 years ago with the idea that the circular economy, which was just starting to gain some momentum, was going to have a hard time actually becoming ubiquitous, which is what we're all about, without actually having the infrastructure and software to wash and sanitize all the products that we wanted to reuse. And I do joke that if I had known how complicated it was going to be, I'm not sure I would have started it, but we did. And we have created a facility in Williamsburg to service the New York market. We approach large corporations that have very significant cafeterias, barista bars, pantries, et cetera, that are using single use. And we provide them with the dishware as a service program. So multiple SKUs of dishware that is reusable. It happens to be plastic. I'm sure we'll touch upon that later. Things like cups and clamshell containers and plates and the like, essentially everything that they need to service their dining operations. Like a laundry service and a linen service, we pick up the dirties every day. We take them back to our facility, we wash them, we sanitize them, we track them, very importantly, from an environmental perspective, and we put them back in inventory, and we do it every day. So that is Redish. We opened a facility in Philadelphia this summer as well, and our goal is to have that infrastructure available across America over the next decade. And that's Redish.
Great, thank you. Larasati.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So yes, I'm Larasati, the owner of Maison Jar. We are a refillery and low-waste grocery store in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. So for those who don't know, Maison means home, house in French. And there's obviously the play word with Maison Jar, Maison Jar, Maison Jar. I want to know who has been to Maison Jar? Oh, yeah. Oh, I wasn't expecting that. Great. So for those who haven't been to Maison Jar, we're basically a grocery store where most of the products are sold in bulk, from jars, food beans, jugs with pumps, and we encourage our customers to bring in their reusable containers. Our mission is to help our customers reduce their use of plastic and single-use packaging. I also like to say that we're a one-stop shop. We carry a wide variety of food products, but we also have home and personal care essentials. So basically, you can come with your Tupperware to take some rolled oats. You can come as well with your hand soap and dish soap balls for refill. Very happy to be here. Thank you, FoodHack and NewLab.
Thank you. Mark.
Hi, thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you to FoodHack and NewLab. So Deliver Zero makes it easy for customers to opt into returnable, reusable packaging at all points of sale. So customers are able to order food on DoorDash or at the counter at restaurants we work with or through Uber Eats and just opt into reusable packaging. That after they check out, they get a text saying, thanks for making this climate-friendly choice. Here's how many containers you have out. Here's your due date to return them. It's 3 weeks out, so you could go on vacation for 10 days and still have plenty of time. And then a link to our returns page where you see options like scheduling a pickup. And we work with some of the logistics companies that do pickups for Rent the Runway and some e-commerce companies so that we're able to do these pickups in a economically and environmentally efficient way. And most of our customers are actually dropping stuff off at restaurants around their neighborhood. And we make it easy to understand how to do that, where, what the process is, so that these containers can be sanitized and reused over and over again. I think most of us don't look at single-use takeout packaging and see emissions. Like if a Hummer drove down the street, we'd all say, oh, that's a climate problem. But we're so desensitized to the amount of single-use packaging, especially single-use plastics in our life, and feel kind of powerless to stop them. So we're making it easy for customers to choose reusables instead of single use and making it easier to return them. I like to say easier than recycling and more transparent. Looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. So obviously you each serve different markets, have different customer bases. With respect to your individual businesses, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you define success as it relates to sustainability. So obviously we're all familiar probably with the term triple bottom line. It goes back to 1994. And we've moved away from strictly economic measures. Obviously those are important, but we're also now thinking about social and specifically here in this room, environmental. So I'd love to hear from each of you how you define that success and how you measure it. And maybe we'll start with you, Lauren, just to mix it up.
So we track the number of usages through our platform, and through tracking the number of usages and tracking our return rate in real time, we're able to estimate the emissions, water usage, and waste diverted through usage of our containers. So we can see the whole system, and then we can filter our data to see how much of that's happening in Colorado versus New York, et cetera. Our individual users are able to see their own impact. which I almost don't like because I don't think it's each one of us like individually taking action, but all of us having access to systems that make it easy for us. But people like to watch numbers go up. So you can log into your Deliver Zero account and watch the numbers go up. And then offices that we work with or the bigger organizations that we integrate with that are almost all publicly traded companies might want to track impact for their own reasons, for their sustainability or ESG reports. They're all going to have to start reporting on scope 3 emissions, and we make it easy for them to see, okay, how many of our customers ordered in reusable packaging? What was the emissions, water, and waste impact created by that usage?
So for Maison Jar being a brick and mortar retail store, we see our customers every day and they give us their feedback. They share with us what they do to, like how after shopping with Maison Jar, they have been reducing their waste levels. And for me, there's no better way to feel my impact than that, receiving that feedback directly. That's how I define success. And that's actually one of the main reasons why I've decided to open Maison Jar. I really wanted to be able to feel my impact, my environment impact. So seeing those happy customers, that's the best thing ever. And then through our POS system, the point of sale system, we also have numbers, and we've been open for 1.5 years, and we have more than 75% returning customers. So that number also shows how healthy the business is, but it also shows how many people are actually reducing their waste at home. And also something that I would like to mention is that, so that's on the customer side, but as a business, we also try and reduce our waste as much as possible. And we're actually going through a zero waste certification with the organization called TRUE. I don't know if some of you are familiar. TRUE stands for Total Resource Use and Efficiency. And they're basically here to certify you on the way you manage to how well you minimize your waste and how efficient you are with the use of your resources. And so we're kind of doing that extra mile to show our commitment. It's not just about saying we do those great stuff to be more sustainable. We actually have a third party that's certifying it. And that's another way for me to show success in the sustainability field.
So I think the uniqueness of Redish is that we set out to make a really scaled impact. That's kind of the mission of the business, and our focus on large institutions means that by definition, we have to have the infrastructure for scale. And what does scale mean? So scale for us today means that on each operational line, we can process 75,000 units every day. It also means that we can translate that scale into the same waste, carbon emission savings and water data that Lauren talked about. Just in 2023, from January to September, we put over 1 million reusables back into the marketplace, and that accounts for almost 100,000 pounds of waste. So very, very specific on, the contribution, and that's how we measure it.
Great, fascinating, thank you. I think it's a very natural segue from that question, and also my relationship with Caroline and Lauren, right? There's this idea of collaboration. So we're in this new space. It's big, it's scary. It's like a systems level problem. We can't solve this as individuals. Lauren, you had just spoken to, right, even not showing the individual their waste because it's kind of losing focus. And you spoke about partnering with, corporations. So for each of you, just in how you view it, or whoever is interested in this question, but how do you see collaboration here? And obviously there's still some competition that exists, but from my standpoint, and again, I reached out to 2 of the 3 of you personally to collaborate in order to solve a problem that was too big for me to solve on my own. So maybe if whoever feels compelled to speak to this question about
Yeah, I'll take it. I think it is, I think first and foremost, I'd like to define circularity in the following way. A lot of people talk about circularity in terms of product. And I happen to believe that it doesn't matter what the product is. It matters whether you can use that product again and again, and therefore not manufacture it once and throw it away. I think it's really, and as a consequence, I think that circularity is a system. You said it yourself. It's a program, it's a system. It has a lot of elements to it in order to make it successful. So I think by definition, you have to collaborate because no one company can actually do every component of it well. And so, we've chosen to really focus on the back end, on kind of the machinery, the automation, the software that makes reusable work, and let others focus on retail, consumer, et cetera. But very, very important that we all work together so that if you've got things that need to be washed, come my way. And about 30% of Redish's revenues is actually from other reusable companies or other programs, other reusable programs that need that back-end capability to be effective.
Yeah, I'll add just a couple small points on like how the collaboration works day to day. So there are a lot of conversations in the reuse sector about how shared infrastructure is really important and these companies working together is really important. It's really easy for most people to get that far, but then what does it look like when it's Monday morning and we all have to work together? And what really makes it work is most people in the reuse sector who are cooperating in this way know themselves and their own teams and their strengths. So everyone's starting to find their lane and ways to play to their strengths and acknowledge the strengths of others. And that's what's making it all work properly. And a lot of it's going really well.
That's awesome. That's exciting. So another thing that I've found particularly challenging in this space, right? We're all sitting here because we're innovators. We're trying to change the status quo. We are over single use. And part of the challenge there is it demands behavior change. And so that's kind of one side, not to be leading. I know Lauren will probably talk a little bit more from a legislation standpoint, but in general, what are like the barriers and the pushback that you've felt? So Larasati, right? Like you're trying to change how consumers shop. And right, you're saying you have a 75% kind of retention rate, which is amazing. Have you felt any barriers or pushback, or do you find it self-selecting? What are the things that are stopping kind of more wide adoption?
I mean, for sure that buying for your daily needs is like a strong habit, and asking people to change and go with reusable is a big habit change. And I usually tell people to start just one thing at a time, like start with your hand soap bowl. But I think an interesting one I want to mention about pushback is pricing, the pricing of our product. So most of our products, especially in food, are organic. So they tend to be more, they are more expensive than conventional, but I'm very careful with pricing. I try and be as competitive as possible. Like if you buy a branded product from Maison Jar, you'll find it at the same, like it's the same price or even potentially more competitive than another retail store in New York City. But a lot of people are expecting bulk products to be less expensive than packaged products. That's actually very true for spices. Like when you buy a spice jar at Whole Foods, you're actually paying for that jar. Whereas when you buy at Maison Jar, you can have a 50%, you're at least gonna save 50%. And that's the same with hand soap or dish soap. But there are a lot of products, and I like to take the example of rice, where it's not the case. For instance, we buy our rice from the brand Lundberg, the organic rice from Lundberg. And if you buy 1 pound in bulk from Maison Jar, it's gonna be roughly the same price as 1 pound in a plastic bag that you'll find in another store. And why it is like this is because today there's no EPR on products. EPR, for those who don't know, is extended product responsibility, meaning that the brand and the producer is responsible for the whole life cycle of the product. and the recycling as well of their products, so that plastic bag. And today, Lundberg is not responsible for the recycling of that bag. It actually doesn't even get recycled. It goes to landfill. We, the consumer, the taxpayer, are responsible for that. I feel that the day when there's going to be true EPRs on product, we'll see a true difference between buying in bulk and packaged product. So that's often a question that we get from our customers, like, oh, how come like it's not like so much less expensive?
So EPR is currently on the table in New York State.
Thank you, Lauren,
which is
for
really
bringing that up.
important. So extended producer responsibility means that producers of packaging are going to need to pay the cost of recycling their packaging. They're going to pay the full cost of their products, which currently we as taxpayers in New York State, like we're the ones footing the bill. What's interesting about the way, there's a lot that's interesting about the way that this bill is worded, and it's called the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act, for those who are interested. I actually still have my testimony from a hearing on this bill on Tuesday in my bag. Break it out later for fun, drink karaoke or something. But anyway, what's kind of interesting is reusable packaging kind of doesn't count towards their EPR responsibilities. So if a producer was kind of introducing a lot of reusable packaging in New York State, and maybe supplanting some of the items that would have otherwise been recyclable packaging. So if they're saying, let's do a little bit less of the recyclable packaging or the faux compostable packaging and introduce more reusables, they're not going to have the same financial responsibility for covering those costs. Because there really are not covered. The government is not subsidizing our business to any meaningful degree right now. So it just like doesn't come into effect in the same way. Anyway, it incentivizes reuse in a way that will be groundbreaking when it passes. Whether that bill is strongly worded or not when it passes is really, it's a coin toss right now. So maybe call your assembly member, email them, let them know that you'd like to see a strongly worded bill pass, and keep paying attention to this, because there will be other opportunities to participate in pushing for a meaningful bill. Something will pass in the spring. Will it be meaningful? It's up to us.
It's hard to follow that. So working with institutions, I inevitably get daily the comparison of the cost of our reuse program, which includes the inventory, the washing, the education, the training, kind of a whole slew of activities that are part of a program, with the cost of a single-use container. And I'm sure everybody here can do that math really quickly. They're never going to be equal. And what the teaching that has to be done, the sale that has to take place, is to actually take that single-use container and identify all the other costs related to it, so that you can actually do an apples to apples comparison. So what does that mean? That means there are hauling costs for all the waste that you're producing as single use that you don't have to do with reuse, because we're essentially hauling it away. There are delivery fees that come with your Cisco's and others that are delivering your products to you. But I think the most important one that's never taken into consideration, and I'm sure many of you have read about this in lots of places, is the cost to the environment. So what they're talking about with EPR is part of that, but I don't even think that completely will cover the true cost to the environment. What it covers is it makes somebody else responsible for the cost, for the packaging cost, but it doesn't take into consideration everything we're experiencing with climate change and environmental change. There are lots of people smarter than me who've got wonderful formulas about how to arrive at that. But I think fundamentally as a society, we have to start considering that as part of the cost if these other systems are ever going to come into play.
Yeah, so this is I think the crux of circular economy. And I'm not an economist, but I've gone fairly deep into understanding this idea of a negative externality, right? So you pay for your LaCroix, you throw out the can, you don't pay to throw out that can, but there's a cost in, moving it, processing it, whatever happens to it, for it to sit in the landfill. And then furthermore, there's a cost of that environmental impact that just kind of disappears, right? Nobody's doing that math. Until we're in a world where there is a cost and it's all tightened up, right? And I think EPR goes a long way in that. What would each of you recommend to consumers, right? To people here or as business owners, how can they contribute before that math makes sense, right? So we know they can choose Deliver Zero, right? They can choose to go to Maison Jar. Are there any other kind of tips and tricks? Like how do we, I think probably a lot of us have some climate anxiety. We feel concerned for what's happening. We feel responsible. I think it's a common feeling to be like, oh, well, the government needs to solve this, or the businesses need to solve this, right? Which each of you are doing in your own way. But what can we, as consumers and individuals, do to help contribute?
So I think when you're just doing the basic math yourself as a consumer, something that doesn't look or feel substantially different from what you're used to is probably greenwashing. That's sort of a good barometer. Like if it's a plate that says I'm more sustainable, but you throw it away in a garbage can at the end, guess what? It's not more sustainable. Or like a car, like driving an EV feels substantially different in a lot of ways than driving a gas powered vehicle. So you're able to be like, okay, like this is tangibly different. We won't get into the true costs of EVs. I think that should be a whole separate panel. They're not totally net zero, right? But all of our individual actions feel really futile. Like every time, like you really use paper towels in my house. And sometimes I'm like, why? This is kind of dumb. I'm creating this inconvenience for myself, or I'll like schlep around to get lower waste groceries. And it's like the reason why is because by partaking in these actions, you start to prove to legislators who do have the power that people are willing to live differently and people actually care about this stuff. And you're proving to corporations that, look, they're not buying our paper towels. So we're going to have to start offering consumers different options, right? It's voting with your dollar. It's so trite to say it, but it works. It's how the groundswell begins. It's especially important in the United States where policy tends to come after some innovation on the business side. In Europe, they just pass policy and they're like, okay, go figure it out. Like regulations are here. Businesses go meet them. And then in the US, it happens in a slightly different order. They need to see innovation first. They need to see customer adoption first. They make it really hard for us. And then they'll actually hopefully pass meaningful policy. But the second point on how to get involved in it as an individual is speak up and ask for those policy changes to be made. I'm not a particularly well-connected person. I'm not anything special. I went to a medium fancy school, so that doesn't get me very far. But I started using my voice and started getting opportunities to connect really directly with legislators who aren't super used to hearing from people, especially not people who are making like just well-reasoned arguments for stuff they care about from an environmental perspective. They think environmentalists don't vote. They think that people only pretend to care about climate change, and you can all prove them wrong.
That was great. So when I have some friends that are starting their low waste journey, they're always like, where should I start? After going to Maison Jar, I'm joking. I usually tell them that the first thing they should do is compost. I'm a big fan of composting. So it's still circularity because you bring back the food to where it belongs, the soil. And actually, I love compost because there's a lot of benefit in composting. It's food for the soil, but there's a lot of negative effects of not composting, because when compost go into landfills, it's actually not just deteriorating itself. It's actually creating some other gases like methane. So it's actually bad not to compost. So I think that for anyone that kind of want to start, compost is an easy one. New York City is doing a lot to have those brown bins everywhere. There's compost at farmers market as well. So it's a first good step.
Lauren already took the speak up, take action. It's all up to us. So I'm not going to repeat that, but I do think that we can individually make a difference. I think that, and again, I'm not trying to halt the US economy here, but I do think that thinking about what you're buying new, whether or not there are other sources for what you're trying to, to buy. I think that when you're throwing things out, and I don't care whether they're old stereo equipment or old sofas or textile, clothing, your first thought should be, who could use this? Who in my circle can use it? What kind of organizations can use it? You can actually get rid of almost everything and have it used again, especially in a city like New York. So I think a lot of it is just being proactive in how you think about things and making that the choice rather than the easy choice of throwaway.
Thank you guys so much. Personally, I've been very inspired by Lauren's kind of legislation advocacy and gotten roped in and met some really amazing people through her. So thank you for that. On Larasati's point, I'm a master composter from Brooklyn Botanic Gardens from 2011. So I've been a big fan of composting, also got very into it after understanding the negative impacts of it, not the positive. And New York has some amazing legislation coming down. So we'll see how it rolls out, but really excited for that. And then I also find it not only useful and helps me sleep well at night, but getting rid of things on Craigslist is also a fascinating social experiment. The people that are on Craigslist
Or Facebook Marketplace.
or Facebook Marketplace and the free groups. But if you want to meet some interesting people, that's definitely a way to do it. But thank you guys. This is a really inspiring piece. I think we may have time for one more or. Okay, we're gonna jump to Q&A. I've got a million questions and I'm really inspired here, but yeah, we'll jump to Q&A and if there's not, then I'll fill the space. Okay.
Yes or no?
I've got my opinion, but I'll turn it to the group and maybe I'll opine after.
They should be in reusable containers.
We've been pitching them on that, like DM them all
years.
right now.
I'll also say from my side, I think everything in the world like has sequencing to it, and so you can't let perfect be the enemy of good. I don't know the numbers on these. I haven't seen the LCAs, but I also know food waste, going back to that, is a big problem. And so some of those meal kits help solve that. I think some of them use excessive packaging and freezer kits and all that. So I don't know where it balances, but I hope it
I'll
does.
also out myself and say I've experimented with them also to understand the experience. Like we've genuinely been trying to get them to work with us, and part of that's understanding the whole experience. I like Marley Spoon. I feel like they have the least packaging for what that's worth. They also write that they offset all carbon emissions, and I'm like, gotta email them and ask them how that's going. But they were the lowest waste that I've seen. It seems like they make a real effort.
Yeah. And I'll say I know some of them, like Cook Unity, which I think shares a building, shares a floor, uses compostable packaging, which again, maybe in a vacuum isn't that helpful, but as New York builds out its system. So again, I think it'll be steps taken. So I think there is a future there, whether it's there right now, I couldn't say.
I actually think that might be worth just reminding people, because I'm not sure everybody recognizes that compostable packaging is actually not good for the environment. It was introduced 10 years ago as a solution to single-use plastic and styrofoam and lots of other materials, and comparatively it was quite good. But compared to reuse, to circularity, it's terrible. You use more power and water to make a compostable package, which in the end run is only used once, in the same way that single-use plastic is. And while I'm certainly not going to sit here and advocate for single-use plastic, the reality is that it uses less energy and water to be manufactured, and it's less expensive. So again, don't take that as an endorsement, because it's not. I am a complete reusable girl here. But I think a lot of people do think that compostable is good for the environment and that you're doing something positive when you use it. and you are not necessarily, because most things do not get composted. The New York City compost rate, I know it will improve, but right now it's about 1%.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add on to that, there's also the PFAS liners that are on all compostable goods, which have zero known half-life and just accumulate in our soils and water and bodies. But I wanted to ask about circularity and sort of reusables, and if there's been any sort of narrowly focused on emissions here, but carbon accounting or anything of the like for sort of hauling it around, the space and weight that it is, like all that stuff compared to, like you're saying, like single-use plastics, which maybe in some cases like super thin, lightweight, low intensity, resource intensity to produce.
Well, one of the reasons why we use plastic for our reusable product is because it is lightweight. It doesn't cost a lot to move it around, and it, retains its usage for way more uses than a lot of other products. So, I think the important part about reusables and most reusable programs is that they are closed loop, meaning when we take a container out of circulation, it doesn't go to landfill. It actually goes to a factory where it gets repelletized and upcycled into other products. And I think that fundamentally is the issue, which is you don't want plastic going to landfill. You don't want it sitting there for 500 years, et cetera. So I think that's a big part of it.
On the miles traveled too, our system or our algorithm takes into account the fact that reuse is not like a total net zero proposition, right? Like you have to produce materials, you have to move them around. It is significantly less emissions intensive than single use of any form. And Caroline did a great job of explaining that. But we're taking this into account too. We don't just assume that our stuff is perfect.
Yeah, and I didn't even answer your question, which is same thing, which is all of the miles driven, all the gas that's used. We do not have EVs yet. They're too expensive. EV trucks are like wildly overpriced. But all of that transport is calculated into the life cycle assessment that's done on all of our products, and every single one of them comes out wholesale better for the environment than anything else.
And the big thing with reuse is you have to reuse it. So if you keep collecting reusable bags, for example, it's not good. If you forget your reusable bag, but you have one at home, just take a single-use bag. Like it's actually better than collecting another reusable bag until there's a system that can properly take them back, clean them and sort them.
Hi. So just a question on, because it's the future of packaging. So I know that all of you are in reuse, but I have a question regarding biodegradable packaging, because right now in Europe, and there is a startup, NewLab, that is working on it. And so I wanted to know if you have any take on biodegradable packaging rather than reusable, just to challenge it a little bit.
Yeah, biodegradable packaging requires significant resources to produce. Often the stuff is made from, say, sugar cane or other crops. There's monocropping involved. So already destroying the soil's ability to absorb carbon in the best way possible. So from the outset, not great. I don't know what NotPla uses. I've seen, okay, they're using what? Seaweed. Okay, yeah. So like there's not an infinite amount of seaweed, right? And you can think about what else could seaweed be doing if you leave algae alone. Is it like better from an environmental perspective? I think that there's a need for other alternative materials. I'll concede that, but those should be focused on use cases where reuse is really going to be a challenging solution, like kind bar wrappers and similar. I'd say NotPla is a better solution than chemical recycling. Absolutely. Food service packaging, especially in cases where food is being prepared and served on site, it's not a good alternative. The optimal solution will always be reuse. Like manufacturing, shipping, and disposing of single-use packaging is always going to create more emissions than reuse.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. I'm curious as to the number of rotations that your packaging has. Like, obviously, after a while, it might break or a customer might keep it. So how do you calculate and keep track of that to make sure that it's actually reused?
The return rate is the key metric. And right now we have a just above 98% return rate. We track it in real time. So any day I can log in and check what it actually looks like.
We have a individual QR code on the bottom of every one of our cups and packages. And when it gets returned from any of our clients, the first thing that happens is it gets scanned. And so we know literally down to the package, and we have, I think our last count was 300,000 pieces in inventory. We know how many times each one of them has been used. We have some that have been used 70, 80 times at this point. And others, very honestly, that we take out of rotation after the second time because a client put tomato soup in it and then somebody microwaved it, right? And we can't get the red out of the container. So I think the general number that people try to use now is at least 20. And actually in our life cycle assessment, we assume that it will be 20. The reality is many are used way more than that. And only over time after analyzing all the data will we actually be able to answer that, but way more than one.
I want to throw in one more way more nerdy point that I know is true for you too, Caroline. So, and I think we probably have some nerds here. So polypropylene is really hard to recycle. Our containers, your containers are both made from polypropylene. The reason our containers are recyclable and they wouldn't be recyclable if you put them in your curbside bin is we have a single stream of polypropylene. It's all very much the same and we're able to get it to like facilities where it can actually be recycled. If you put it in your curbside bin, it's going to end up with, say, other types of plastics and say it was just other types of polypropylene, right? Like, why not? Why can't you just take 100 different kinds of number 5 plastic and melt it down and turn it into nice, clean, new polypropylene pellets? It doesn't work like that. Once you have different types of polypropylene in the same stream, it gets more complicated. And the short reality is it doesn't happen. Number 5 plastic does not get recycled unless you have kind of industrial use cases like ours and a clean single stream.
All right, cool. Last question.
Thank you guys so much for what you do. Given that a lot of these plastics are touching food products, I was curious how you guys are thinking about effects of microplastics, especially as the plastics break down or if they're heated in a microwave. How does that impact or thinking about the material you choose as well as its life cycle?
I'll answer. Neither of us wants to, right? It's a harder question to answer. The reality is we are presently using virgin polypropylene because I'm actually more comfortable answering that question. I think there's good use for recycled polypropylene, and it's very likely that including PCR in products we use in the future will make sense. But this is one of the arguments actually for virgin polypropylene. It feels safer. There have been some studies, I think it was some Columbia University professors who did this, that found that the shedding of microplastics is like less frequent in reusable packaging because the shedding happens more like in the initial use. So the single-use packaging that you use, you're more likely to absorb more microplastics from that first initial and only use in that case. But I can't really speak well to that study. And plastic is the right material for the use cases we're addressing. Everyone in this space has really considered the pros and cons of every material possible. And from an environmental perspective and from a scalability perspective, and not just from a scalability perspective, I'm including environmental in there very consciously. Plastic is the right material for us.
Yeah, I think all of us have done more pro and con charts than you can imagine. So I'm just going to agree with Lauren here. When you start looking at scale as well, any of the other materials that are always put forth don't scale. Glass certainly doesn't scale. You can't move glass around. It breaks. When it breaks, it goes right to landfill. A lot of people are proposing stainless steel. Guess what? There is no stainless steel manufactured in this country anymore. So start to consider the fact that it's coming from China, it's coming from India. You have no idea what the labor conditions are. You have the S of ESG instead of the E, right? It doesn't wash well. There are watermarks on it. It needs more labor to take that off, which makes it more expensive. I mean, there are that's why I'm going to go back to something I said earlier, which is so critical. These are programs. These aren't one thing. You have to consider kind of every component of it through its whole cycle. And fundamentally, I will say this. When a product has the same characteristics of plastic, we will be the first to move to it. But a lot of products that are being manufactured today or being tested cannot withstand the high heat of the washing. And so it's great that you have the product, but it really isn't reusable if you can't wash and sanitize it. So it's those kinds of considerations. And today, the material doesn't exist.
And I'll just say from my work at Walmart and the rounds, and tying back to that idea of collaboration, I worked really closely when trying to redesign the containers for the rounds and trying to figure out what this material would be. Like I wasn't going to be comfortable sleeping at night with virgin polypropylene until I had a million of these conversations, spoke with Returnables in Australia who uses stainless steel, spoke with Get Dizzy in the UK that uses a different type of compostable plastic, and ultimately just, kind of aligned back with Lauren and Caroline who've done the work and gone through that same exercise that I did. And again, I'll just go back to the point of not letting perfect be the enemy of good. And I don't think anyone here is saying we've got this nailed. Let's just keep doing exactly what we're doing. I think what we're saying is that reuse is a huge step up from single use. Compost probably falls somewhere in the middle, but we just have to keep moving forward. And I think taking all the advice from the panelists on how to do that as individuals, as companies, and helping just push everything forward is the way to go. I don't know if we have time for anything else, or I think
Let's give it up for the panel.
Yeah.